Morning, everyone. Oh, it's so good to be here. I'm Gino. This is my colleague, Rick. And we co-pastor a small community of believers up in a little town called Gig Harbor, Washington, which is south of Seattle. And we've been there, we're just enjoying it. And Chap asked us to come down and share our story. Not only our story about our friendship, but also our story about the church.
Well, when we left Gig Harbor, we kind of had this idea that we lived in the most beautiful place in the world. How many of you have ever been to Gig Harbor? Anybody? Yeah? Seattle? Anybody been to Seattle? We really love it. But at the same time, when we came to Newport Beach a couple days ago, we thought, maybe we better just think about our home as top 5, because this is really amazing, absolutely amazing. And not only the place, but the people. So it's been so great to be able to sort of meet some of you. We just love Chap and Dee. In fact, Chap's been on our teaching team at Harbor Christian Center for years and has contributed in so many great ways. And a lot like this Branches initiative, where we've done a lot of classes and opportunities to learn about Jesus and about his mission and all that. And Chap's made a huge contribution, as well as Dee, just a major contribution to the therapeutic community in our area. So it's just been really kind of your gain, our loss, but it's so great to be able to come and sort of be a part of this space. Chap and Gino and I and a few group of guys, we raced sailboats for the last 7 years on Thursday nights. And I don't think Chap really knows the name of our boat because he was always ahead of us. So, we're going to miss him on those Thursdays. And I know that when I stepped up here, a lot of you, first time you saw me, you thought, man, that guy is getting in shape. Was that your first thought? Well, it's true. I am getting in shape. And for some of you geometry majors, I guess what I've been told right now is the shape is a trapezoid. That's what shape I'm in. I'm working my way toward a rhombus or definitely a parallelogram. So anyway, that's the shape I'm in. But believe it or not, back in the day when we were in college, when we became best friends, we were college tennis partners.
And we're still serving.
Yeah, good one. Yeah, what a racket. No, but we're having a ball. So, no, okay, I'll quit.
Often, people will ask us, so what's it like to serve over 40 years with your best buddy from college, And I say, well, it's fabulous, it's wonderful. And here's why it works, because we're opposites. We see life just differently. As a matter of fact, I walk into life and I see it as an architect, details and plans. Rick looks at life as an artist, and he walks in and he's creative and spontaneous. So that's part of that relationship that we really enjoy. We've both been married over 41 years to our spouses. Rick married Marvalee, and then I married Mardell. And Marvalee is a blonde, yep. And Mardell is a brunette. And we often tell people when we got married, when we married them, man, we married up. Yeah, I mean, we are just really fortunate with these wonderful, godly women. And I'll tell the congregation several times that if Mardell ever leaves me, I'm going with her. I mean, that's just the way it is, So we are very fortunate. And in our friendship, Rick is the extrovert, meaning that he gets his energy and his renewal by being with lots of people and talking to them and just spending time with them. And as a matter of fact, you know what Rick's thinking because he's talking. And that's just the way it is.
May I ask you a question?
And for me, I'm a highly functional introvert. I get my energy, my renewal from, being in quiet moments and reflective and contemplative, and most people don't know what I'm thinking because I'm just always talking to myself. That's just the way it is.
And I grew up on a farm in a small farming town in eastern Washington. So I know all about, farms and ranches, and that was kind of my childhood. And my parents, the ones who begat me, were the same parents my whole life. So I have the original set. And I graduated in a class in kind of a country school. I had 26 students in my class when I graduated. I noticed the high school across the street probably has a bit larger classes than that, but it was very small. And yet, I tell people that I did graduate in the top 10 of my class.
On the other hand, I was born in France. I was raised there and born there and didn't move from there and came to the United States when I was in 4th grade. So I learned English in 4th grade. And that's why sometimes you'll catch me kind of putting the emphasis on the wrong syllable. And so that'll happen to me a few times. And, of course, when I grew up, my mom was married 5 times. And so the traditional family was not something I knew. Stability was not something I knew. And so, again, that's what makes us opposites here.
So I'm from the farm, and Gino's from France. So sometimes we tell people that he's a little bit au revoir and I'm a little bit hee-haw. That's kind of how we explain it. But together, see, since we're opposites, we're one sort of semi-normal person. What we try to think about is like, together we're almost one complete Chap Clark. That's what we're shooting for. Yeah, that's what we're going for.
So let me set the stage for our time this morning by telling you a story of when I was 11 years old. At the age of 11, my stepfather walked into the living room and he put a stool in the middle of the living room and he said, "We're going to teach you to swim." And so I thought, okay. So he says, "Get on this stool," and I get on that with my stomach on the stool, and he began to show me the basics of swimming. And so he said, "This is the breaststroke, this is what you do," and you keep practicing that. And then the freestyle, I did that, and then I tried the butterfly, but I kept flying off the chair or the stool, so I stopped doing that. And I was kind of feeling really good about myself, thinking, man, I'm doing this really great. And so when I would go to school, I would tell my peers, that I'm taking swimming lessons every day, and I'm swimming laps every day, and I'm looking good. I'm just fabulous swimmer. And I would say that for weeks and, brag about how good of a swimmer I was, except I didn't tell them that I was doing it on a stool. Several weeks later, our family went on a camping trip. And on that camping trip, we were near a lake. And my stepfather says, "Hey, let's go out in the middle of the lake and just take a little rowing trip together." And I thought, "All right, why not? I know how to swim." So we were out in the middle of the lake, and on our way there, my stepfather says, "So how's the swimming going?" And I said, "Boy, you wouldn't believe. I am an awesome swimmer. You ought to see me swim on that stool." And I just kind of bragged, and as an 11-year-old with an arrogant mind, I just kept talking about how great I was. And then he said this, "Why don't you show me how good of a swimmer you are?" And two things happened. First, fear set in. I just thought, oh, no, really, I'm good. But I tried to talk him out about, the fact that I don't need to show him anything because I am really good, because I've been a great swimmer in the living room. And then the second thing happened. He picked me up and he threw me in the middle of the lake, got on the oars and started rowing back. And here I am just doing everything I could and just jumping, trying to find it, and then all of a sudden, I'm starting to swim. And I'm following the rowboat, and I'm getting there to the shore. And something happened. I moved from having the information and the theory of swimming, and I moved from the living room, and I became a swimmer because I engaged with the water. That's really when I became a swimmer. Years later, we find ourselves, some 24 years ago now, in our living room, and there's 18 people, and Rick and I and our spouses, and we're talking about starting a church. And we're in the living room, 18 of us. We're dreaming, we're praying, we're thinking, man, wouldn't it just be great to reach this community for Christ? And we had the same dilemma. We had a lot of great ideas in the living room. And then, of course, from the living room to a high school we rented, and, people started coming, and hundreds of people were coming, and we were great at reaching attenders. As a matter of fact, our slogan that's been part of our church is "No church experience required," because that's always been our target audience, reaching people who may not realize that they matter to God. God longs to have a relationship with you and our community and all those wonderful things. But what we discovered is we had a lot of living room theories. We had a lot of attenders, but very few people who were engaging in what was going on.
So we started asking God, how can we move out of the sort of living room of Christianity and, into the lake, like, get in over our heads, right? So we started praying about that, and we want to see ourselves working with people who were drowning in poverty, in maybe mistrust. They were marginalized, trafficked, targeted, people that were longing for justice, who had never experienced grace. And, we weren't really engaged in that. We were just sort of getting together and making plans, and singing songs and having talks. And so we started asking God, to help us. Now, have you ever heard somebody say, "God spoke to me"? Right? Whenever somebody says that, I always think, really? So we asked ourselves, well, if we ask God to speak to us, how are we going to know when he does? This is what we think. We think that when God speaks to you, he gives you an idea. And the way you know it's God and not you is that it's too smart to be you. Like you get this idea and you think, is that my idea or God's idea? And you act on it and you realize, this is too smart to be us. This must be God. So what happened was, we were meeting in this high school, and people were showing up, and the high school was just wonderful to work with. They said, hey, you can always rent space on the weekend. That'll be great. But then they said, but there's one weekend a year you can't rent this space because we have a big event and it's previously booked. And we were like, well, what are we going to do? Well, this is where we got the idea. We said, what if we get out of the living room and we jump in the lake on that weekend? And what if, and so we started organizing. It took us, 6 months to organize and to connect with every nonprofit in our entire region. And then we mobilized hundreds of people to volunteer on that day all over the region, all over that during that weekend. And we were able to contribute thousands of volunteer hours to these organizations. We cleaned stuff, we painted stuff, we loaded stuff, we distributed stuff. We learned all about these social service agencies we'd never ever even heard of. We were making beds for the homeless, and we were at the furniture bank, and we were chopping wood for the wood bank. We were doing all this stuff. We didn't even know these people existed. We were helping people age in place in their homes. We were building wheelchair ramps. We were repairing, and we got involved in all this stuff. We had never done that, ever. We just kind of did the living room thing, and suddenly we were in over our heads. And what happened was, you might think, well, wow, that really changed those people that you helped. Well, I like to think that we contributed and that we were useful, but you know what it changed? Us. Changed us. We were the ones who started experiencing this different kind of Christianity that was more impacting. We moved from attending to engaging. That's what happened. If you think about it, Jesus talked about this. He had a bunch of people that were following him, and they loved what he said, and they liked the free meal deal and all that. And he said to them, hey, you need to go out. He sent them out. And then when they came back, they said, man, amazing things are happening. We're living the spiritual life. Jesus said, I know. I saw, man, like darkness falling from the sky like lightning falls to the earth. But then he said this to them, and this is in a place called Luke chapter 10. He said this, don't rejoice that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your name is written in heaven. So he said, look, yeah, there were some great things happening, but what really happened was you got a sense of who you were. And you began to grow in your confidence that I'm involved in God's work in this world. That's what happened to us. And so it's really interesting, though, because every once in a while we have these meetings with pastors, other pastors. I don't think people thought this, but pastors did. They would say to us, you don't have church on one weekend? Like no church? How can you possibly do that? And we knew kind of what they were thinking. They were thinking, does that not impact your budget? That's the kind of pastors. They're thinking, aren't you taking a hit financially? And we thought, I don't know. So last year, this is after years, we checked on it, and this is the truth. We checked on it last year. The weekend that we were scattered instead of gathered was the highest giving weekend for Harbor Christian Center. And when we looked that up, and we saw that, yeah, it was kind of cool. Here's what we thought, though. We go, well, that idea was too smart to be us. That's too smart for us, for sure.
So as we moved from attending to engaging, we came up with this little term or a little slogan that really is our goal is to become a community in mission. That's really what the local church is all about. It's just a community of people. I remember when we first started, one gentleman several months later into it to discover we were starting a church. He says, well, you don't have a building. I can't come to a church that doesn't have a building. His mindset, and real fine gentleman, a godly man, his mindset was that the church is a building. And we discover when you look at the New Testament, the church has never been a building. The church is a place where we gather, but the community gathers in a place. And so really the way we like to say it is that, that we are in a building where we gather together as a community to belong. And the building facilitates that. In the New Testament, for instance, we realize that word, the church, the Greek word is ecclesia, which is, really means it's a gathering or a community of people called out from their homes to a public place. And yet over years, it slowly got translated from a community of people to a church building. and slowly we're moving it back to where it belongs. It's a community of people who gather in a facility where we stage what's going on so that then we can go out as a community in mission. Even Jesus reminds us of that when he asked the disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And Peter answers and says, "Well, you are the Christ. You are the Son of God." And Jesus says, "On that confession, I will build my church." Again, there's that word, the ecclesia, the community of people who gather around his name. So he was not saying that on this rock is going to be a great foundation for a building. Rather, he was saying we're going to build a community on the confession of who Jesus is, the Son of God, the Messiah, God in the flesh. Jesus was not talking about brick and mortar. He was talking about a community in mission. And that's really what we move to from being an attender to engage as we move into being a community in mission. The other thing you don't see in the New Testament is you don't see the early believers getting together and go, "Hey, how was church the other day? Or how was church today?" Or that. See, because they didn't perceive church as an event you go to. Like we go to the Broadway play, or we go to a ball game, or we go to a movie. A lot of times we go, "Hey, how did the people on the front of the stage, the people with the microphones, how did they do?" Rather, the question is, how is the community doing in fulfilling its mission and engaging with the people that are not presently here? Because here's this wild thought. The people, the church, the community. You realize we're the only organization in the whole world that exists for the people that aren't here. We are the only organization that exists for the people that aren't here. We gather together because someday we hope, we pray, we share, we give our resources and our time, so someday those folks will be here to experience the grace and the love and the mercy of God. That's what the community in mission is all about.
And there's an amazing verse in the scripture. In fact, those of you that happened to be here last week, Chap actually told a story about these two guys, James and John, the sons of thunder, and their mom, who was lobbying, Jesus, saying, "Hey, can my sons be big shots?" And Jesus said, "You don't have it quite figured out." And then he said this amazing thing. He said, "I didn't come to be served, but I came to serve and to give my life so that people could be set free. People could be rescued. People could be released from hostage," one translation says. And then he calls us to the same. He said that we're called not to be recipients of service, but to be those who serve, those who distribute. And we have an amazing illustration of that in the town that we live in. It helps me understand what Jesus was talking about. In our city, we have a prison. It's a Washington State correctional facility for women. And there are hundreds of women who are incarcerated. And in that prison, they have a famous program. It's called Prison Pet Partnership. And they have a dog training curriculum for service dogs in this prison. And you can look it up online, if you just decide you want to Google Washington State Women's Prison Dog Program, you can hear people talk about it. And what happens is these inmates are being transformed by these animals that they're training. It's this incredible unconditional love and transformation that's coming from these dogs. Now, the dogs are all rescue animals. So the dogs were going to be put down, but now suddenly they have a brand new purpose, and so they've been rescued as well as being a rescue dog. And then the families that receive these animals that are trained are suddenly liberated from circumstances they find themselves in, because these dogs are trained especially for seizure, for emotional support, for people that have had strokes. We have dogs every week at our church that come because we have folks that volunteer in the program. And after the dog is fully trained, then volunteers have to take them out in the community and go to the grocery store and come to church and go to events so that the dog is socialized. And so we have these dogs every week when we gather as a community, and we meet all these different dogs. Last week we had Liam. He was a golden lab, and he's been trained for someone who needs help on the right side. So he's called a right side dog. So he does everything on the right, and just remarkable animals. It's been a really cool thing to have this experience. Well, what happens is this verse that Jesus talked about, where when these inmates serve these animals, they're set free even though they're incarcerated. Something happens, they get transformed. The dogs themselves, you know, they were going to be put down and now they're rock stars. You know, there's actually a $10,000 value placed on the dog after it's been trained. And then there's fundraising that goes on so that the families who receive them don't have to pay for the dog. They get it as a gift, but that's how much that dog is worth. And this dog was considered worthless prior to entering the program, right? And then the families, they get set free because suddenly, you know, they have assistance and their world becomes huge all of a sudden. And I have a friend named Scott, and Scott's an amazing jazz vocalist, but he has muscular dystrophy, and so Scott's hands work, but his arms don't work and his legs don't work, so he has an electric scooter he runs around in. And so he and I have done travel together a bit, and he had a service dog. His first service dog, it was a golden retriever named Orson. Now, I'd never really been around somebody with a service dog, but Scott, when this happened, when he got this dog, suddenly his life just expanded because he was afraid to go out, and you know he just needed help. Well, we went to like a fast food restaurant like In-N-Out, right? And I'd never done this with a service dog before, but Scott rolls up, you know, and I'm walking with, and Orson stands there, and he says, we order, and then they say, okay, that's like $8. And so Orson grabs his wallet out of his purse that's hanging on the handlebars of his wheelchair and puts it up on the counter. And so then Scott says, just take the money out of the wallet. So the guy takes out a 10 and he shows the dog, just taking a 10, just taking the 10 out, you know. And then, he makes change and he counts it out to the dog, 75, 80, 85, 90. And the dog's like looking, and then he puts it back in the wallet, and Orson puts the wallet back in the purse. And then we went and sat at a table, and the dog just waits. And so, you get a number like, hey, you're number 92, right? So then they would call out like 88. And the dog would look over at Scott, way across the restaurant, and Scott would be like, so he'd just wait. Finally, when they call 92, he goes like that. Dog grabs the bag and brings it to the table. And I'm just stunned, right? But then my favorite part, when we finished, he took the bag and threw it in the garbage for us. So that was kind of cool too. But you see, what happened was that I saw the freedom that came into my friend's life when he was served by this animal. It's called a service dog. You guys have seen them. They have the jackets on. They say service dog. Well, see, Scott was actually afraid for his own security. You can imagine he's rolling around and somebody could just take his wallet right out of the purse on his handlebars. He was afraid that somebody would, he could be mistreated. He could be, in trouble. So he just stayed at home. And suddenly he got Orson. And Orson was not only his friend and his assistant, but he was his defender. And all of a sudden his world became huge. This is what we've seen. When we serve, everybody wins. It changes the person. It's transforming. For this program is an example, of what happens, what Jesus was saying. That when we go and serve, liberation, freedom, expansion, we start living in a bigger world. That's what's happening. And here's the deal. When we started doing this kind of stuff, and it started changing us, we started understanding, here's an animal who gives its entire life in service to others. And then we think, that's what Jesus said about us. That's what Jesus called us to, living a life in service to others. What a great way to live. Now, I know there's some of you, you're thinking, okay, enough on the dogs, Rick. What about a cat, So I checked with the program. No cats in the program. Cats are just not set up for this kind of work. I mean, they have a different skill set. Because you never see a blind person walking along with a seeing eye cat, right? You're not going to see that. You never see a police officer pull up, and there's a robbery, and he says, get out the feline unit. That's not going to work. I mean, that's not what cats are for. Cats are different. They're cool. They're just so mysterious, and that's why cats are great marketing. They remind us of things that sort of are desirable. Like, so if a car company makes a cool car, they name it after cats, like Jaguar, right? Cougar, like dogs. No, you're not going to see like the Beagle from Buick, right? Or like the Chevy Chihuahua with the vibrating headlights. That's not going to happen. So, but here's the thing: dogs, although they're not cool, they're loyal. Loyalty, men and women's best friend, right? And so they have this amazing capacity to serve. And also, I might remind you that in most cases, loyal chases cool. Dogs chase cats, right? So what's happened is that we have this example in our own community of what Jesus was saying. And so when we see those dogs, around town, it's always a reminder to us that, hey, when we live a life in service to others, everybody gets set free. Everybody.
It changes you. And, what started out for us as a church to have an annual road trip now has become kind of a regular part of our church on a weekly basis. My wife, Mardell, and I have been serving at the rescue mission every week. And I remember a night where my heart was just changed in a powerful way. And that's what, as Rick says, there's something that happens to you when you move from the living room and you begin to engage with a culture of people that long to hear about the grace of God. We were serving and getting ready on an evening of getting all the food ready to serve 250 homeless individuals. And of course, in that preparation process, you get to meet the people you're going to serve with. What was interesting is that most of the people we serve with are actually doing community time. They're actually working out, time that the judge has said, hey, you're going to pay back society by putting some community time in. And there's a young lady, probably late 20s, and her name was Rachel. And so we got to talking to her, and I said, so Rachel, that's pretty cool that you're volunteering here with us. She goes, well, I'm not really volunteering. I've got 200 hours of duty I got to do. I've got traffic violations, and the judge sent me here. I go, oh, okay, well, and then all of a sudden, they opened the doors, and God's wonderful children who were angry and tattered and disheveled and homeless and hungry started walking through, and so we began to serve, and I'm doing the salad, and Rachel's doing the dressing, Mardell, my wife's doing the roll, and about 20 minutes into it, and all of a sudden, this gentleman in front of us who's all disheveled and hasn't shaved for months and just stands right there, and he says to Rachel, "What are you doing here?" And I'm thinking, okay, whoa, what's going on here? And she looks up, and she looks at him, and she says, "Dad, what are you doing here?" And all of a sudden, I thought, wow, that is incredible when you realize the pain of people's lives. All of a sudden, you realize that these are people, they're not stats. And she says to me, she says, "You know what, could you take over here? I'm going to go and get a tray, and I'm going to have dinner with my dad." And I'm thinking, I got to do salad and dressing now? Shoot, man. I'm not that smart. And then I watched them as they make their way to the cafeteria. There's something that happens in your heart. All of a sudden, you realize these are God's creation, made in the image of God, like you are. Valuable to God, like you are. Loved by God, like you are. Sure, you could say, well, they've made choices, and the consequences are painful. And yet, God calls us to walk alongside and begin to share His grace and His mercy. And sometimes they continue to make bad choices. It doesn't mean we stop walking with them. Sometimes they make good choices. But we share the grace of God. And I remember that night, I gave them a meal. In return, they changed my heart. You no longer look at somebody as homeless. You see them as a human being. That's what happens when you engage. It's not about a theory anymore on a stool. It's not about the basics. It's about going in the deep end. And yes, there's anxiety, and you're just, oh, what do we do? And it's not so much what you do that matters or what you say. It's about being there, being present, recognizing that God's put you there. You don't know what the outcome's going to be. Some of them I've not seen outcomes. Some of them I've not seen them again. But what happens to you when you engage? And then when you get back together in community, there's excitement. There's this, what God has been doing in and of our life. Just like when the disciples came back 2 by 2, they're saying, man, you ought to see what God is doing. And when we gather, we're celebrating what God is doing because we see that God is working in us and through us. And that changes the dynamics of a congregation.
So when all of a sudden ideas like homelessness became names like Rachel and Sam, You guys know what I'm talking about. Many of you are involved in justice work. Many of you are involved in compassion work. But for us, part of our journey was getting out of the living room and getting in over our heads and finding out that the juvenile justice system, that the housing issues in our community, that there was space for us to be involved, and it's changed us. And in fact, one of the things that happened, we were out several miles from our city working with some people out there, and they said, "Now, who are you guys again?" And we said, we introduced ourselves, and you're from some church? And we said, "Yeah." And we told them, "Yeah, it's called Harbor Christian Center. You probably never heard of it." And they go, "Isn't that the serving church?" And we thought, "Yeah, I hope so. Maybe so." And we were just really, I don't know, it just really kind of moved us to hear somebody identify us in that way. So we want to just continue to grow. And, St. Andrews is a great example to us because, of course, we're just teenagers compared to St. Andrews, We just started, a couple of decades ago, and you guys are out in front of us. And so it's a real inspiration to be here and to see, God's work and God's people in this community. But we just want to inspire because part of what your website describes, your activity, which I always get a kick out of, looking around and, online, and it's, it's accurate. It says that we gather, to strategize, and we get inspired and, encouraged and motivated, reminded of what Jesus said. And then, man, we hit the road. We jump in. We're in and over our heads, right? And that's how we change the world that we live in. You're the church. You're the church. And so it's, I don't think we ever get tired of hearing that. Well, the Apostle Paul put it this way: we should carry one another's burdens and thus fulfill the law of Christ. That's what he said. What's he talking about? He's saying we got to find people, we got to pay attention for people that are carrying more than they can actually sort of, they're doing a little more than they can do. They're overwhelmed, right? And when we do that, we're doing what Jesus was talking about, to carry one another's burdens. So when we leave today, keep our eyes open for people, and we think, man, that's pretty heavy. That's pretty heavy what you're going through. Like, how can I be useful? How can I be helpful? How can I walk alongside you? And that's what Jesus called us to live a life in service to others. That's living, right? And it just turns out that it's the best. It frees us up, right? So go in God's power and God's peace. Amen.